Namaste. Over 100 years back, Sri Aurobindo saw that the world was going through, or rather going to go through, many upheavals, revolutionary changes, which of course had already started. Um, but through all this, he saw not only India becoming free, but many new things of the future that were wanting to manifest. He saw the various crises that we were all going through as an evolutionary crisis. 100 years down the line, and he even in fact indicated that in this crisis is concealed the choice of our destiny. Means every crisis is also a point of choice, and based on the choice we either change and go towards the future, or we fall back onto the line on this side, onto the old, the past. So this is how he foresaw things, and over a period of time he developed the whole way, the method, gave us a path, of course with the collaboration of the mother, the divine mother. He gave us a sunlit path through which we can move toward the future, provided we make this choice. But the crisis aspect was there. There will be crisis, and these crises, every crisis will be a question of choice. Now, this was something very interesting because the world did go through, not only during that time to time it goes through a process of crisis. And every crisis, if we look back in the whole evolutionary history of mankind, is a crisis which is a prelude to change. So first there is a conflict between two ways of life, then there is of course a crisis point, and then there is a conscious choice, and then there is the change. So here he showed us the entire roadmap. So when crisis comes, we can either try to handle it with all our past ways, past equipment, past methods, which of course are generated by the mind, meant for the satisfaction of the ego self, driven by the ego self, and for the satisfaction of our desire, comfort zones, greed, fear, etc., etc. This is the operating system of human beings. So, but the more radical the crisis, the more the capacity or the possibility of a leap. And if we take a leap, that means a complete change into a new consciousness, a new being, whose operating system will no more be the ego but the psychic being, who will no more be driven by desire but the impulse or the will or the urge of the divine within him, the Shakti, the impulsion of that. And instead of acting on the basis of selfishness, he will live for a larger work of God in the world, service of the divine in the world in various ways. And greed, fear, ambition, lust will be replaced in him with a heart that is nobler and generous, kind, vast, wise, strong, luminous. This is what he gave us as a roadmap to the future. Now, 50 years down the line, when Sri Aurobindo gave this kind of a magic phrase in 1915-16 in the Life Divine, 50 years down the line, the mother repeated it again. Now, after the supramental manifestation, she gave these number of messages: men, countries, continent, the choice is imperative, truth or the abyss. He gave another, beautiful message: the world is preparing for a big change. Will you help? Are you ready? Blessed are those who take a leap toward the future. The future of the earth depends upon a change of consciousness, but it is left to men to decide whether they will collaborate with the change, or the change is thrust upon them by the power of crashing circumstances. Now, 50 years still further down the line. Now, these messages are somewhere in the late 1960s. Now, 50 years still down the line, which is when we are celebrating the 150th sesquicentenary of Sri Aurobindo. Again, we need to ask ourselves, have we made those choices? So, every individual, every country, every group of humanity is being asked upon to make this choice. Now, what really is this choice? This choice is, of course, we open to Mother and Sri Aurobindo, we go to the center, we pray, we worship. This is an integral part of the yoga that we follow. But the choice is whether we want to operate, belong to the old world, the old way of life. One may do worship, prayer, everything, and yet be driven by the ego. This is something we need to understand, because more and more we see people, they, there is a feeling that just because we pay a lip service to Sri Aurobindo, there is a, Sri Aurobindo cautions about it in the human cycle, that the way humanity deals with an ideal is ordinarily to pay lip service to it or a verbal homage, but it never tries to change its life based on that. It colors it more or less, but doesn't change. So inwardly we don't change. We just outwardly, we may belong, or we may try to turn it into a kind of a religious approach. Now, nothing wrong with that. As I said, that's an important part, integral part of our, journey. But most important is inwardly how we are changing. Now, this most important change that the mother, cautioned us about and insisted upon is, tell the ego its authority is gone. So we cannot, still we act as if under the ego, my authority, my way, my thinking, my approach, everybody should follow it. So repeatedly she was reminding us that tell the ego its hour is gone. And she also reminded us it's the hour to be heroic. And what is true heroism? Heroism, several ways she defined. One of them is the courage to accept one's own errors and mistakes and to learn from them. But the true heroism is to tell the ego that your role is over, now you are dead, my life is meant for following the divine will, surrendering to the divine will, which actually is the supreme act of heroism. It requires tremendous courage. Otherwise, we are driven so much with self-will, etc. So this is what this moment is. And if you see, last 10 years, we can ask ourselves the choices, whether it be the small elementary choices in our everyday life, the food we eat, the people we associate with, the kind of conversations we have, to our reactions and responses to, let's say, a condition like the corona or various political and other turmoils. Are we really making the choices in the light of Mother and Sri Aurobindo? Or are we still following the same old world and its pattern, the same material scientific paradigm, and yet claiming to be, that we are on the side of the choices? Now, this is where this is going to hit us harder and harder. This is only the beginning. The more we, one of the first things that the supermind is going to really do with us, when Mother was asked, what is it going to drive away? She said, drive away, why nothing? Because supermind will put everything in its place. Then after a pause, he said, it's going to drive away hypocrisy from nature. So to profess one thing and, practice somebody else, something else. So it is going to take that away. And when it does it, it's going to pain. So that's why, knowing this, at least, many of us are very fortunate and privileged to be brought to this path. So more and more we have to make dynamic, conscious choices on the side of the transformation. Because if we don't do that, we run the risk of falling back toward the old, and to fall back toward the old is to destroy. After all, what really is death? Death is when inwardly something in us may continue to progress, but the body, the mind is unable to, keep pace with that progress. One of the signs of old age is when people think about what things were when they were, 20 or 30 or 40. Well, they are not able to keep pace with the forward march of mankind. I'm not saying that everything that is new is, many new things are fashion. They are not really the future. They are as much going to go away as, the old consciousness. But nevertheless, it's important that we begin to more and more make conscious choices toward the transformation. It means replacing the mind and its so-called analytical way of thinking and understanding life by a more and more consciously intuitive thing. It means the mind should begin to fall more and more quiet. And in that quietude, wait for the divine wisdom, the divine afflatus to really take charge of our speech, our thought, and reveal to us in the quietude of the mind the truth that is appearing, manifesting, and not react based on personal preferences, likes and dislikes. It also means that our heart right now cabined into, small little sections of this is my type, this is mine, and this is other. It becomes really vast and is able to embrace not just human beings, but all creatures of the earth. And not only earth, but all beings in this universe, and reclaim our universality and see in every one of them some manifestation of the Narayana. But at the same time, this doesn't mean this embrace is not the way it is normally professed, that everything is mine, so, Vasudev Kutumbakam. It doesn't mean that, we forget that very purpose for which creation is built. Creation is built to manifest the divine. And there are things which come and help us, or there are, ways of life which are helping toward the future, which we must accept and encourage and go through them. And there are things which are going to retard and block the way toward the future, which we must actively oppose. That's what we see Sri Aurobindo doing during the Second World War. That when he saw it was not about war. People think he was against war. That's not the point. In fact, in Essays on the Gita, he says very clearly that according to Heraclitus, war is the father of all things. It was not being against war or pro-war or violence and non-violence. It was against a way of life. So Hitler represented a way of life which was cruel, which was, something which was full of deception and falsehood. Whereas there is another kind of war where human beings act under courage. So at every point of time, this courage is demanded from us, this faith, this endurance. And if we don't do that, we run the risk of falling back to a lower species. Sri Aurobindo and the mother particularly, she cautioned us after the, manifestation of the supermind that there will be slowly this humanity is going to, based on the choices, go on either this side of the new creation or on the other side. And there will be those who are open to Sri Aurobindo thought who will at a point of time be suddenly uplifted us. Right now we may not feel that degree of change because we are interconnected. But a time will come when suddenly we'll be as if cut off from the rest and lifted up towards a new creation. Cut off meaning thereby outwardly, the way in ashram and many places this is practiced. Whereas inwardly, of course, we remain connected with everything. Whereas there will be a humanity which will fall back, It's an aborted attempt at being human. The mother used the word, it's a perverted kind of humanity, which lives only for satisfying its greed, its ambitions, which justifies its fear under whatever name or pretext. This is going to collapse. This was the meaning of the message, men, countries, continents, the choice is imperative, truth or the abyss. So this is what she expects of us, and it's a wonderful 150th year when we can take a complete clean break from the past. As the mother said something very interesting, that Sri Aurobindo's birthday is the day of great amnesties, when much of the past is not much, all past errors are effaced. So we can take a leap toward the future. And in this context, I would like to read a passage from the mother. She says, after all, the whole problem is to know whether humanity has reached the state of pure gold or whether it still needs to be tested in the crucible. It's based on one of the aphorisms of Sri Aurobindo, where he says very clearly, wherefore he selected another one. Wherefore God hammers so fiercely at his world, tramples and kneads it like dough, casts it so often into the blood bath and the red hell heat of the furnace, because humanity in the mass is still a hard, crude and vile ore, which will not otherwise be smelted and shaped. Because we are so hard, our hearts are so hard, we are so rigid, we are so crude. So therefore it needs to be hammered. But then he reminds us, as is his material, so is his method. Let it help to transmute itself into nobler and purer metal. His ways with it will be gentler and sweeter, much loftier and fairer its uses. So that's what she reminds us, that we have to look into ourselves. It's an hour of great sincerity, that have we really been transmuted into pure gold? One thing is evident, humanity has not become pure gold. That is visible and certain. And this he is speaking in 1957. Already there were a number of people who were around her, who were there right from beginning. But something has happened in the world's history which allows us to hope that a selected few in humanity, a small number of beings perhaps, are ready to be transformed into pure gold, and that they will be able to manifest strength without violence, heroism without destruction, and courage without catastrophe. Now, to prepare ourselves for this, the entire yoga, wideness, plasticity, compassion, benevolence, endurance, faith, all this is required. And, it's enough if there are few. Transformation is not a mass process. It's just not, it's like the leap. Now, once there are a select few of human beings who are transmuted, then it will have a cascading effect. But at first, the effort has to be concentrated upon a few. This we need to understand, that transformation is not a wholesale process, because man is not ready even to shed a little habit. Forget about transformation. The second aspect we need to understand is that, frankly speaking, even logically, if man doesn't change, you change any system, have the best of things, best of machines, equipment, but man is the same. So how will it help? There was a very interesting letter of Nirodha where he tells to Aurobindo, I believe the mother is planning a new hospital with all, super facility. And he says at the end, dream of a new millennium. And Sri Aurobindo reminds, on the contrary, the dream of a new millennium is when we won't need hospitals. See, this whole idea that this is how we will make things better, this must collapse. We have to empower ourselves. It's we who are the authors of our pain, the authors of change. What is Sri Aurobindo's call in Savitri? O force-compelled, fate-driven, earth-born race, O petty adventurers in an infinite world, but not for a changeless littleness where you bend, not for vain repetition where you build. And then he, of course, reminds us, that instead of being a prisoner of a dwarf humanity, this transient earthly being, if he so wills, can fit his acts in a transcendent scheme. So instead of bringing God into our scheme of things, we'll do things our way, but God is there to support us. We should, for a change, take the leap and say, not my way, but your way. Not my way, not others' way, but your way. And tune ourselves to the will of God and try to live life like that. This is what is expected to us. And for that, she says, but in the very next paragraph, Sri Aurobindo gives the answer. If man could once consent to be spiritualized, if only the individual could consent to be spiritualized, otherwise, whatever we may do, we may make a big movement, we may make number of hospitals, we may make number of, shelters, places for people to stay, eat, everything. Langars, free langars, meditation centers, nothing will change if we don't change from the human, mental, egoistic driven person into the spiritualized humanity of the future. And time is going to press more and more. She reminds us, something in him asks for it, aspires, and all the rest refuses, wants to continue to be what it is, the mixed ore which needs to be cast into the furnace. And why it's so challenging? Because suddenly we will have to be nothing. See, as a medical practitioner, I can say that when one of the persons suggested when I came here, said, why don't you join one of the, medical colleges, and it will be nice, helpful for us, because, you could become an expert, more and more expert. And so I said, I don't want to strengthen my ignorance. That's what humanity has been doing for thousands of years. Yet another hospital, yet another, school, yet another, meditation center. We have been doing this for thousands of years. Yet another system of governance. No, let it be few, but few who are ready to put everything in one basket. Ready to take the leap from man to the divinized humanity of the future. And so she says, and perhaps it would be enough if some individuals become pure gold. For this would be enough to change the course of events. We are faced with this necessity in a very urgent way. So you see, this losing what we are. If I start learning a new way of healing, I have to forget that all my achievements, my medical knowledge, all this counted for nothing really. It only strengthened my ignorance. All my techniques of meditation, all the, ways of teaching that I had devised, and many other in every other field, all my way of human relationship, all that meant nothing, because something new has to emerge and we have to learn that. And then she says, this courage, this heroism, which the divine wants of us, why not use it to fight against one's own difficulties, one's own imperfections, one's own obscurities? Why not heroically face the furnace of inner purification, so that it does not become necessary to pass once more through one of those terrible, gigantic destructions which plunge an entire civilization into darkness. This is the danger that is keeping at us. So if just few human beings can cross over, not every monkey turn towards Rama, but those few, they could be integrated into a human. In the story of Moses, there were those slaves, few who could go with him. In fact, the kings collapsed. So, in fact, we are reaching an age when it will not be that, people who are kings and they are going to go. It is those, the meek and the humble, who are going to go through because they feel the necessity to evolve. So, she says, closes with this is the problem before us. It is for each one to solve it in his own way. And I add, time presses from the human point of view. So, more and more, we are living in an era when on one side we are not left with our own resources. So, that's a great help which is there available. And this help is becoming more and more stronger, especially on Sri Aurobindo's sesquicentenary. On the other hand, the resistance, the old world still continues its ways. It wears sometimes new and acceptable masks. So we should be very careful. There was a hospital which was being named some time back. I remember in one place, I won't mention where. And the name was Sri Aurobindo Institute of Medical Sciences. So I asked the person, why are you naming it this way? He said, because I was thinking along the lines of AIIMS, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. So SAIMS sounded much better. So Sri Aurobindo Institute of Medical Sciences. So I said, what is there of Sri Aurobindo in it? So he had no clue at all. And he just wanted to put some photographs and some flower, these things. Now I understand things may start this way and maybe become beautiful towards the future. But that's their business. But for us who have the call, we have to thrust ourselves fully. It's a different story that this man started something and eventually went to the jail because there was a lot of fraud going on in the name of Sri Aurobindo. So we should be so careful that, it's something so great, special privilege that has been given to all of us. And we, being born in India, is a privilege by its own right, native right, because we breathe spirituality, we drink spirituality with the mother's milk. And then being brought to this path of Sri Aurobindo and the mother is a double, triple, quadruple, infinite privilege. Now at least those who have this complete faith, with aspiration and surrender, if we can completely give ourselves to this change, come what may. Whatever be the ordeal, whatever be the fire and furnace of purification, to ready to go through it rather than falling back to the old ways like adventurers who are discovering something new, like human beings in the forest who didn't know, what we are really looking for. So if we too could take that stand and move towards this future which is full of, on one side it's adventure, it is full of the unknown, but on the other side it's full of the assurance of the divine, where the end is certain but the path is full of the adventure. So let's take this adventure of transformation which Sri Aurobindo has brought for us, maybe just a few, but to these few of us whom the mother has called us today to listen to her in all of us, let us take this beautiful year and the help that has come to hasten our consecration, to make it more and more complete, and to increase in our sincerity and aspiration toward the goal of supramental transformation, toward the goal of divinization that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have given to us and whose doors they have opened to us by their infinite grace and love. Namaste.
Good evening, everyone. Today we will be talking about yoga of transformation in integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So I would like to make a PowerPoint presentation here to help us out. So what is this transformation? What is this triple transformation in integral yoga? So if we look at the explanations Sri Aurobindo gives to the whole evolution of consciousness, so we could see that, especially in the terms of the flame, the divine will inherent in nature, The key is Agni, says Sri Aurobindo, the consciousness force. And the whole evolution can be described as Agni's journey in 4 movements. Involution, devolution, involution, and evolution. From the eternal center and within him. The fourfold movement is in fact he. All is he. Himself the play, himself the player, himself the playground. He outside time, outside space, the pure being, the pure consciousness, the great white silence, where all is in a state of involution, self-contained, still formless. So we will come back to this scheme again. Here there are these major movements mentioned by Sri Aurobindo. This is the first involution and devolution, the first cycle. Then again involution and evolution. So as we can see, so evolution is taking place from the Anna level of the matter towards Vijnana, the supermind, stage by stage towards Prana, Manas and Vijnana, covering all the levels, vital, mental, and finally the supramental. So, why should Brahman, asks Sri Aurobindo, and this is important for us to understand the very reason of this creation, because we will not be able to understand its transformation. Why should Brahman, asks Sri Aurobindo, who is perfect, absolute, infinite, needing nothing, desiring nothing, at all throw out force of consciousness to create in itself these worlds of forms? If then being free to move or remain eternally still, to throw itself into forms or retain the potentiality of form in itself, it indulges its power of movement and formation, it can be only for one reason: for delight. All this world is created for one reason, for delight. As Mother says, for additional ananda. And she explains that he had his ananda of self-identity. Ananda of identity he has already. He doesn't need it. But he wanted to have the ananda of unity. He wanted to be many and to multiply the ananda of his self-identity through uniting with himself in different beings. The Supreme, says the Mother, the Supreme, says the Mother, decided to exteriorize himself, objectivize himself, in order to have the joy of knowing himself in detail, to be able to see himself. You can imagine that the divine, which alone was, could not see himself because he was the only subject who could be. Now he wanted to see himself objectively, and for that he needed multiplicity. So the first thing in himself which he exteriorized was the knowledge of the world and the power to create it. This knowledge, consciousness, and force began its work, and in the Supreme Will there was a plan, and the first principle of this plan was the expression of both the essential joy and the essential freedom, which seemed to be most interesting feature of this creation. So these are the fundamental rights of every creature in this world: the essential joy and the essential freedom. So how could he, who alone was, become many? it's quite difficult because you alone are. So there is a description. The first creation. I'm referring to the Vedas now, but it is based on Sri Aurobindo's vision. And we will come to it, mother's story. Night, says the Veda, was born out of the shining truth of the supreme power. Not the light was born out of the night, but the night was born out of the light. From the night the waters of the inconscient came into being, and from the waters of the inconscient the time was born, the creator of all that moves. This is from the Rigvedic hymn. So out of himself he cast a luminous shadow, all these worlds, from the superconscient to the inconscient, gradually denying himself, withdrawing his supreme knowledge from his supreme power, becoming unaware of these worlds, fallen worlds, as himself, losing his awareness in his power. So withdrawing power from knowledge and letting power be. In the enigma of the darkened vasts, in the passion of self-loss of the infinite, a contradiction founds the base of life, the eternal, the divine reality has faced itself with its own contraries. Being became the void, and conscious force, nescience and walk of a blind energy. And ecstasy took the figure of world pain. So you can see being became nothing, void, and conscious force became nescience and walk of a blind energy. So energy is still there, but it is blind. It cannot know itself. It doesn't know what it is about. And the ecstasy, the bliss, turned into the world pain. In the mother's story, the first supreme emanations, which came from the Supreme, this is the picture from Huta. These are the four emanations. It was consciousness in light, that is basically Chit, bliss, Ananda, truth, Vijnana, and life, Sat, the immortal life of the being. Being is there. So they fell in this order. First, consciousness in light turned into the darkness, and they felt because they thought, or they felt rather, that they are the supreme, and they didn't work together. They kind of separated from one another, and this separation created their gradual fall. So consciousnesses in light gradually fell into the total darkness, which pulled the bliss, which slowly and gradually turned into the suffering. These are the bottom signs of these new qualities. So truth was pulled and slowly turned into total falsehood. That means misplacement in time and space of things, adharmic things which are not following their own law. And finally, these three emanations, when they fell, they pulled down the very being, and life turned into death. And so the immortal alone, being first, could die. So when that happened, and these emanations, first emanations which were supposed to create the world, turned into their opposites. So when the first involution took place, says the Veda, this is the fall, the Supreme involved itself in got involved in the darkness, in the material inconscient, and the light was turned into darkness. The creation became as if unsteady, says Taittiriya Aranyaka. Shithilam iva, adhruvam iva in Sanskrit. It could not sustain itself. It could not be. because it was not aware of itself anymore. So it fell into oblivion. So the Supreme Self had to enter and to support it from within. So when he entered, as the Veda says, himself by himself, Atmanatmanam Abhisam Vivesha, the creation became steady. So when he, the Supreme, entered into his own fallen emanations to support them from within, they became the creation. That which was falling into oblivion was sustained. There are beautiful lines in Savitri. When all was plunged in the negating void, non-being's night could never have been saved if being had not plunged into the dark. So if being had not plunged into the dark, the non-being's night could never have been saved. It wasn't. It would turn into nothing. There would be nothing there, being. So the night was saved from the point of view of disappearance and from the point of view of appearance. So it came to the evolutionary stage. So it started to work for the evolution. It's a very interesting statement of Sri Aurobindo. Could never have been saved from both sides, as night and as light. Because night is nothing but light, which forgot about the Supreme. Yes, the same as suffering is nothing but bliss, which disconnected itself from the Supreme. Falsehood is nothing but truth, which forgot the Supreme. And death is nothing but life, which disconnected itself from the Supreme. So in the mother's story, in order to repair the fall of the first emanations, the Supreme Mother Aditi delegated out of herself the force of love, which has plunged into the darkness of the first creation. Yes. So in the Vedas it is Agni, as we read that passage, that it is the evolution of Agni, the divine will, the first avatar, who lay down and hid himself within the darkness, the immortal among mortals, as they speak about him in the Vedas. It is because of his presence that everyone and everything is evolving, seeking after the higher knowledge of the Supreme which it lost. So there is within the darkness, there is the divine light, which is causing the darkness move towards light. There is a beautiful picture by Huda from the mother's sketch. This is the first avatar, which lay down at the bottom of the darkness of the inconscient. And Mother says when she arrived at this, being for the first time touched it, it opened its eyes and looked at the Mother. This is an occult experience. So what is evolution then? As Sri Aurobindo defines it in the synthesis of yoga, a soul of the divine is here slowly awaking out of its involution and concealment in the material inconscience. So slow unfolding, or as Mother describes this, redemption of the fallen emanations. There are beautiful lines in Savitri. He sleeps in the atom and the burning star. He sleeps in man and God and beast and stone. Because he is there, the inconscient does its work. Because he is there, the world forgets to die. Because the divine is within the inconscient, the world which is not, which lost its connection with the Supreme, forgets to die, to disappear. And everything and the inconscient itself is doing its work. Now, these were important preliminary statements about the transformation. We have to see what is to be transformed. So our unregenerated, fallen, unconscious being has to be brought back to its self-awareness. And this is the transformation. So Sri Aurobindo speaks about a double process of evolution in the life divine. This terrestrial evolutionary working of nature has a double process. There is an outward visible process of physical evolution with birth as its machinery. So we have children, children have children, and the evolution continues. For each involved form of body housing its own evolved form, evolved power of consciousness, is maintained and kept in continuity by heredity. That's why this is what we know as Darwinian evolution. But there is, at the same time, an invisible process of soul evolution with rebirth into ascending grades of form and consciousness as its machinery. At the same time, the soul which is incarnating here is reincarnating and evolving and developing with the help of these reincarnations. So we have a kind of double process. One is the body evolving, the instruments, and the other process parallel is the soul is evolving, which is plunging into the bodies, plunging into the bodies. So when I am born now in this body here, so my grandson somewhere in the future becomes my father. And so this investment which I made of consciousness into my genetic code, through epigenetics, through my experiences and so on, all those corrective measures which genetic code accepted, I will pass forward to the future generations through my progeny and also through the influence of other people and interactions with them. Consciousness is constantly modifying the genetic code, and that modification will meet me in the future as my new body, more receptive of the spiritual needs of my soul. So basically, my body is stretched over time, over many, many bodies through progeny, because I cannot sustain this body in this particular form. I am mortal, so to say. It cannot be sustained, but over generations it can be sustained. So I'm stretching my body over generations towards the future where I will receive a better instrument for my needs, for my soul needs. And at the same time, my soul evolves through this, becomes more and more capable of dealing with these instruments of knowledge. So this is a marvelous vision of Sri Aurobindo. Maybe these things I will skip. This is from the Life Divine. The same explanation in the metaphysical language. So as we know, Brahman is or maybe not, maybe I will read. Brahman, says Sri Aurobindo, has projected in itself this luminous shadow of itself and has, in the act, begun to envisage itself and consider its essentialities in the light of attributes. He who is existence, consciousness, bliss, and that is Brahman, envisages himself as existent, conscious, blissful. And that is how Brahman becomes Atman. Self-aware Brahman is Atman. He becomes existent, conscious, and blissful. From that moment, phenomenal manifestation becomes inevitable. The unqualified chooses to regard himself as qualified. The one becomes the many. So this is how he who alone was became many. And that was his idea in the Vedas also. Bahusyam, may I become many. That was the very beginning of creation. So he achieved this through this qualification of his essentialities and attributes, as Sri Aurobindo says, in the light of attributes. So here we see this Brahman as existence, consciousness, bliss, supermind, mind, life, matter. It's all Brahman. Yes? Taittiriya would say, Annam Brahmeti Vyajanat. He recognized Brahman as matter. Prano Brahmeti Vyajanat. He recognized prana as Brahman, and so on. Mind as Brahman, supermind as Brahman, and Ananda as Brahman. And all these beings are being born from the bliss. By bliss they live, into the bliss they go. Yeah? All these beings are born from the supermind, and so on. So this is the location, the greater location, which is impersonal, spirit. But at the same time, when the Brahman becomes self-aware, he becomes self, Atman. And we speak about him in terms of Purusha, Sat Purusha, the divine self, Chaitanya Purusha, all-conscious soul. These are terms by Sri Aurobindo. Anandamaya Purusha, all-blissful soul. Vijnana Maya Purusha, great soul, or supramental being. Manomaya Purusha, mental being, vital being, and physical being, Pranamaya and Annamaya. We know this from the Indian tradition, this division. And notice Vijnanamaya Purusha connects the higher Sat, Chit, Ananda with Manas, Prana, and Anna, triple lower worlds. So we have two hemispheres, higher hemisphere and lower hemisphere, and in between this supramental connection of the two. That's why the supramental manifestation is the next stage in evolution. So now I'm moving to the interesting topic of transformation finally. The true being may be realized in one or both of two aspects, the self or Atman and the soul or Antaratman, psychic being, Chaitya Purusha. The difference is that one is felt as universal, the other as individual, supporting mind, life, and body. So we have this double soul, as it were. We have the unborn self over the head, that is the self or Atman, and the other is inborn self in the heart, and that is Chaitya Purusha or psychic being, Antaratman, or Antaryamin, Angushtamatra Purusha, Hridi Guhayam. We hear about this in the Vedic tradition. So, when one first realizes the Atman, one feels it separate from all things, existing in itself and detached. Nirvanic experience, yes, of being totally detached, remote, uninvolved, unborn, never born and never will be born. Disinterestedness comes with this. When one realizes a psychic being, it is not like that. For this brings the sense of union with the divine and dependence upon it, and soul consecration to the divine alone, and the power to change the nature and discover the true mental, the true vital, the true physical being in oneself. Both realizations are necessary for this yoga, says Sri Aurobindo, for integral yoga. And this is an interesting point where the transformation is to be understood. Transformation is done by the psychic being within, not by the self above. The self above is supporting the psychic being. It is giving to it the support and the foundation to act freely, because psychic being is nothing but projection of that self. But realization above, the fundamental nirvanic realization, does not change our world. Going beyond into mukti, moksha, is not changing anything here. And this is the fundamental difference between the older yogas and Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. So if we look at this, what Sri Aurobindo speaks about new creation, we could see, let me summarize these three stages of creation. The first creation was this fall of the first emanations, yes, which turned light into darkness, bliss into suffering, truth into falsehood, and life into death. They created the fundamental field for manifestation, which laid out the field for its future manifestation, and all the levels of consciousness were unfolded gradually, creating all the worlds in the involutionary order, from light to darkness, from the superconscient to the inconscient, from spirit to matter. So the second creation was the plunge of the Supreme into the darkness of material inconscience, bringing the aspect of the self into existence in terms of individual growth and realization. From this point, matter becomes animated, that matter, unconscious matter, and the evolution takes place. So there is life in matter. It can evolve in plants, in animals, in human beings. It goes on till the psychic being is fully individualized, that spark within, that projection of the unborn self becomes the being individualized and formed finally. And the instruments of its expression, body, life, and mind, are fully developed in this double process of evolution to embody the spirit. And the third creation would be the supramental descent or supramental manifestation of that very supermind which connects us to the transcendental, which reconciles nature with the soul. There is a constant opposition between our inner being, soul, and the nature. Nature is unconscious, soul is conscious. And between them, there are all the grades of consciousness. And this tension will be removed by the supramental descent, the third creation, which enthrones the psychic being, that spark within, as the Lord of creation, and gives it a direct access to the higher realms of being and consciousness, establishing the law of the spirit in the whole nature. So this is the aim of the evolution. So Sri Aurobindo speaks also about different statuses of divine consciousness and also of statuses of transformation. There are different statuses of the divine consciousness, says Sri Aurobindo: individual, universal, and transcendental. There are also different statuses of transformation. First is the psychic transformation, in which all is in contact with the divine through the individual psychic consciousness, through our spark within the heart. Next is the spiritual transformation, in which all is merged in the divine, in the cosmic consciousness, so the enlarging of the psychic presence in the cosmic sense. And the third is the supramental transformation, in which all becomes supramentalized in the divine Gnostic consciousness, opening to the transcendental bliss, consciousness, and truth. So, few words on each of these. The psychic transformation is a flame born out of the divine, and luminous inhabitant of the ignorance grows in it till it is able to turn it towards knowledge. It is a deputy of the unborn self, or Atman, of that unborn self, and so the psychic is the deputy, the projection, in the forms of nature. The individual soul supporting mind, life, and body, standing behind them, watching and profiting by their development and experience. So the psychic is also learning from the mind, vital, and body how to be here in the world of time and space, though psychic being is the immortal being. So it grows in its capacity and bridges through the gap towards the surface, coming to the front. If it can come forward into the front and govern overtly and entirely this outer nature of mind, life, and body, then these can be cast into soul images of what is true, right, and beautiful. And in the end, the whole nature can be turned towards the real aim of life, the supreme victory, the ascent into spiritual existence. You can imagine if the inner immortal being comes to the front and occupies our mind, vital feelings, emotions, and our body, physical existence, that we, through the psychic, only seek the divine in everything, that what kind of transformation it is, the psychic transformation. The spiritual is the next. So the psychic being, which is already in front, can, by spiritual influx, by the greatest spiritual influx, by the universal powers of the divine, which are in the universe, Vishvadevas in the Rig Veda, all the gods, universal godheads, who can come and help psychic to grow and occupy the whole universe. The experiences which Sri Aurobindo had in Alipur jail, when he saw Narayana in every being, in every creature, in everything. This is that experience. Can, by spiritual influx, enlarge itself and embrace the whole world in an intimate communion or oneness. Or it may become aware of its eternal companion and elect to live forever in his presence, in an imperishable union and oneness as the eternal lover with the eternal beloved, which of all spiritual experiences is the most intense in beauty and rapture. All these are great and splendid achievements of our spiritual self-finding, but they are not necessarily the last end and entire consummation. More is possible. So one can live constantly in the presence of the universal Godhead, finding him in all the forms, like Mirabai saw Krishna in the cloud, in the tree, in everywhere. So this kind of bhakti, finding the divine everywhere in the world. But more is possible, says Sri Aurobindo, and this is the final supramental transformation. So the psychic, still the psychic, everything is connected to the psychic. The psychic transformation, after rising into spiritual change, has then to be completed, integralized, exceeded, and uplifted by a supramental transformation. In supermind is the integrating light, the consummating force, the wide entry into the supreme Ananda. The psychic being uplifted by that light and force can unite itself with the original delight of existence from which it came. So a psychic comes from that delight, from Ananda. Overcoming the dualities of pain and pleasure in this world, delivering from all fear and shrinking the mind, life and body, it can recast the contacts of existence in the world into terms of the divine Ananda. And this is the final transformation. Thank you. Namaste.
आज आमर आलोचनार विषय वस्तु जो संपर्क में विस्तृत भाव में आलोचना करागला से नीड ऑफ द आवर तार एक कनक्लूडिंग रिमार्क बा सारांश मुझे उपस्थापित कर जहाँ पूर्ववर्ती वक्ता मैंने कहीगले तार एक सारांश मात्र मुझे यथार्थ पॉइंट्स हिसाब से कौन घटे एक्चुअली पृथ्वीर विवर्तनकारी पदक्षेप गोटे समय आसे जो समय हो एक अद्भुत समय विवर्तनकारी क्रिया जो पृथ्वी पृष्ठ चलू थाए गोटे समय आसे बहुत प्रतीकात्मक समय एवं विवर्तन जो पदक्षेप नि जाए हूँ एक युगांतकारी पदक्षेप जेभली हजार हजार वर्ष धरी जहाँ हो न थाए ता हवा को आरंभ करे एभली एक विशाल पदक्षेप नापे काल शक्ति महाकाल अपेक्षा कर रही था गोटे टाइम स्पिरिट जहाँ कहुई एवं यही टाइम स्पिरिट बा काल महाकाल से गोटे परीक्षा निए जमती पशुरु मनुष्य है प्रथम देखा पड़ो यहाँ इतने सचेतन भाव ना पशु कौन प्रकृत निजक प्रस्तुत करी मनुष्य हाँपी शर्त गुड़िक पूरण कर ठीक बर्तमान से भले एक समय आसी जितेबाला विवर्तनकारी सत्ता जे मनीष पृथ्वी पृष्ठ रही महाकाल ताको एक प्रश्न पचार से प्रश्न है कौन प्रकृत सक्षम परवर्ती पदक्षेप नापी जो जो शर्त गुड़िक पूरण करा पड़ो यही समय ता अर्थ मनुष्य अच्छी मनुष्योत्तर आउ एक सत्तार जाकि विवर्तन पहुँचब आउ एक बींग्स आउ एक सत्ता आविर्भूत हम प्रस्तुत की आर यू रेडी ये प्रश्न कराऊँगी यहीटा यही शर्त गुड़िक है नीड ऑफ द आवर प्रकृत जदि कह जाए यही संकटकारी मुहूर्त जो नीड ऑफ द आवर यहाँ श्रीमंद कहते यहाँ हूँ आवर ऑफ गॉड ताको यही भाव में कह What is the need of the hour of God? What is the need of the hour of God? A hour, जदि ए समय जदि देवमुहूर्त हुए, what is the need of the hour of God? यार प्रकृत रे आवश्यकता कौन? कौन देवमुहूर्तर आवश्यकता? ये देवमुहूर्त कौन? यार बहु रकम वर्णना श्रीमंद देइचंती तांका पुस्तक रे ये जो विषय अद्भुत विषय ये जो विषय नीड ऑफ द आवर से एक्चुअली 30 एप्रिल 1967 आश्रम न्यू एज एसोसिएशन द्वारा गोटे सेमिनार होता से सेमिनार रे माँ ये विषयटा चूज करते बाची द नीड ऑफ द आवर व्हाट इज द नीड ऑफ द आवर माँ निजे चूज करते माँ आंसर भी देते मो आंसरटा पढ़ी दूची ताहले बुझीहब जे सब्जेक्टर गुरुत्व कौन आंसर माँ बड़ बड़ अक्षर लिखिले सिंसियरिटी नीड ऑफ द आवर है आंतरिकता ट्रांसपेरेंसी सिंसियरिटी तापरे छोट अक्षर लिखिले डू नॉट ट्राई टू डिसीव द डिवाइन भगवान को ठकिया चेष्टा कर नहीं यही है नीड ऑफ द आवर सिंसियर हुआ आंतरिक हुआ भगवान को ठकिया चेष्टा करनी यही समय गुरुत्व माँ विभिन्न भाव में बुझे बहु भाव में बुझे माँ कहते ये centuries and centuries humanity waited for this hour, it has come, but it is difficult. यही समय बहु वर्ष धरिकी जिते बड़े कहगला 1956 फेब्रुआरी 29 पर माँ कहले थिंग्स दैट आर प्रॉमिस्ड आर फुलफिल्ड बोली पिलाने पचारे माँ को प्रॉमिस कराइला कौन फुलफिल है माँ कहले जुग जुग धरिकी सबू जगार महान महान व्यक्ति मैंने आसचंती अवतार अवतार नुहे अवतार मैंने आसचंती महापुरुष मैंने आसचंती से सब कहते नुआ पृथ्वी हम नुआ समय आसब सब परिवर्तन हो परिवर्तन शुभारंभ है फाउंडेशन दिगला 56 फेब्रुआरी 29 होची से महान परिवर्तन फाउंडेशन दिगला नीड ऑफ द आवर एटा एवं एथिपई जो विषयटा सबुठ बेसी दरकार बहुत सुजोग मिल ए नीड ऑफ द आवर प्रचुर सुजोग मिल जी जहाँ जो दिगरे जावाई चाहब ता आगे कबाट खोली संपूर्ण भाव से कहते जे टेक व्हाट यू कैन डू व्हाट यू कैन माय हेल्प विल बी विथ यू जहाँ पार्च कर जो काम कर से कम निश्चय तुम साहाय्य पाइब तापर कहते ऑल सिंसियर एफर्ट विल बी हेल्प टू द मैक्सिमम प्रति निष्ठापर आंतरिक चेष्टा से प्रचुर भाव में साहाय्य पाइब संपूर्ण साहाय्य पाइब तापर कहले ये जो आवर नीड ऑफ द आवर डेफिनेशन दे कहले ए आवर होची हीरोइक इट इज द आवर टू बी हीरोइक वीर योद्धा करी गड़ आम्मानकर ए अर्थ होची हीरोइज्म कौन कहले हीरोइज्म ता नुहे जे कहा विरुद्ध लड़वा क्या पकईदेवा क्या हतादर करवा हीरोइज्म हूँ प्रकृत हीरो सीए से निजक संपूर्ण एकीभूत करछि निजर केंद्रीय संकल्प को भित्तिभूमि कर निजक एकीभूत करछि एवं जो माने निज उपर अख्तियार करने को चाहती भगवान साहाय्य संपूर्ण भाव में रपर से कहते जे ए भूल कर नहीं माँ का मेसेज मन पकईकि भगवान को ठकी दे हम बोली प्रति मुहूर्त परीक्षा हम परीक्षा पास कर तो ब्यूटीफुल फेस ऑफ द डिवाइन मदर श्रीमद कहले भगवान भगवती मुख अत्यंत सुंदर कि से भी महाकाली भी रूप धरी पारती ठकी दे हेनी से स्पष्ट भाव में श्रीमद कहते यही मुहूर्त ए आवर्रे अंतरात्मा को निर्मल कर सकल आत्म प्रवंचना कपटता मिथ्या आत्मश्लाघा दूर कर निर्मिशेष दृष्टिपात कर तो अंतपुरुष मध्य शुण सेठारे किए ते डाकुची तुम प्रकृतिर असरलता एक समय भगवान का दृष्टि विरुद्ध आदर्श आलोक विरुद्ध बर्मतुल्य थिला वर्तमान किंतु होचे बर्म मध्य छेदतुल्य आघात को निमंत्रण कर जो जो उपाय अवलंबन करी मु पास कर आसली परीक्षा मो जीवन में सफलता लाभ करी थरे आध्यात्मिक जीवन स्पर्श पाइला से सफलता विफलता को डाक आन ये हूँ यही मुहूर्तर विशेषत्व जहाँ जहाँ मत जीवन में सफलता आनी दौला जो जो घटना से घटना बर्म हूँ जहाँ मत विपद भगवान पाखु निजक रक्षा करा भगवान मत अधिकार करने को चाहती मुझे अलग रही रक्षा पाइबा चाहे सेगुड़िक मोर से उपाय गुड़िक ढाल भितर छिद्र भाया हम भगवान आलोक को डाक आन एवं जे दृढ़ भाव जार विश्वास रही कौन हम पड़े उठिक ठिया हम उड़ीगले पुणी आसिक ठिया हो निज जगार कारण ये हूँ आई समय केतबले जे कौन घट कि कहीहबनी ये हूँ अप्रत्याशित मुहूर्त और द अनएक्सपेक्टेड श्रीकृष्ण आसिले दुर्योधन पाखे ठिया ताकू मागिले यहाँ देव मुहूर्त था हाँ बोली कहीदे सब चेंज होता निजर गौरव रही था वंशनाश हो न था केते कौन घटी था से अज्ञानता अहंकार को जाबुड़ी धरी पड़ा एवं आवर ऑफ गॉड को जे गॉड निजे से मुहूर्त उपस्थित अच्छा से अस्वीकार कला ये हूँ घटना जो घटना आम बुझीपर जे नीड ऑफ द आवर कौन नीड ऑफ द आवर हूँ जे संपूर्ण भाव में आंतरिक हवा निष्ठापर हवा सत सिंसियरिटी आउ एक शब्द अर्थ रही से सिंसियरिटी अर्थ हूँ सतरे आम भगवान को चाहूँ सतरे आम भगवान को चाहूँ ना भगवान को चाहवा विषय आम कौन करूँ ना कथबार्ता करूँ केवल यदि सतरे भगवान को चाहूँ ताहले एक क्रुशियल आवर आम पे आशीर्वाद तुल्य हो उठिब ए टर्निंग पॉइंट ऑफ द अर्थ हिस्ट्री पृथ्वीर इतिहास रे ये जो विशाल परिवर्तन मुहूर्त आम ये ठिया होचु जहाँ श्रीमंत आवर ऑफ गॉड बोली कहते से आम व्यक्तिगत देव मुहूर्त गोटे मांकड़ जो रावण सांगे युद्ध करुच्ची श्रीरामचंद्र विजय है तार निजर विजय आम एक कथा केबे भी भूल नहीं आम प्रश्न पचारू निजको अति क्रुएल निष्ठुर भाव में पचारू जे मु सतरे भगवान को चाहे ना भगवान को चाहबार छलना कर सतरे भगवान को चाहे ना भगवान को चाहबार छलना कर सतरे मोर से दरकार से अवस्था दरकार ना अवस्था प्राप्तिकर उद्देश्य को आखि आगे रखिकी निजको प्रतिष्ठित करार कार्य करुँच सबू हम भगवान को ठकी हेनी माँ कहले डू नॉट ट्राई टू डिसीव द डिवाइन भगवान को ठकी हेनी नीड ऑफ द आवर हूँ टू बी आज सिंसियर एज पॉसिबल एवं सिंसियरिटी अर्थ हूँ आम भितर जो हाईएस्ट कॉन्शियसनेस रही ताकू जाबुड़ी धरवा सब मुहूर्त रेफर करवा ता द्वारा परिचालित हवा या छड़ा आउ कि कम अर्थ यार करा जाए नहीं छोट अर्थ करा जाए नहीं किसी चलई नवा अर्थ करा जाए नहीं किसी सब कर भगवान को मैनेज करी हबनी कारण भगवान जदि पकेबे आखि ताल जीवन में से घटना घटब जहाँ आमको पाखक नहीं जीव सो नीड ऑफ द आवर इज टू बी सिंसियर इन आवर एस्पिरेशन नीड ऑफ द आवर इज ऑलवेज टू रिमेंबर वी कैन नेवर रिसीव द डिवाइन यही संकल्प नवा आम देखू भगवान प्रत्यक्ष साहाय्य आम पाखे रोचे यही मुहूर्त आमको उपयुक्त करने टू मेक अस फिट फॉर दिस क्रुशियल मोमेंट दिस इज द नीड ऑफ द आवर